If you have any doubt of the need for me to do what I do, you need look no further than Mike Johnson, currently Speaker of the House, third in line for the presidency of the United States, and a young earth creationist. When an idea is far-fetched and as thoroughly debunked as young earth creationism is this close to the center of our national government, our job as YouTubers is to continue to point out just how untenable a position this is. We absolutely must keep this idea out of our schools, out of our government, and out of the heads of rational-minded people. Johnson's views on abortion and same-sex marriage are equally problematic. When a man thinks with his brain turned off, seeking wisdom from an ancient holy book of dubious sources, we can never end up with rational leadership. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. I was surprised that more atheists aren't pointing out the problems with having a young earther as Speaker of the House. I expected so many videos that people would be starting to tire of them by now. Oddly, that has not been the case. We all have slightly different takes and perspectives, so I look forward to seeing my fellow atheists also covering this particular problem young earther. Why is this such an issue? Why should we care what Mike Johnson's personal religious views are? Because they shape how he thinks, which in turn shapes the legislation that he intends to bring into law in this country. The heart of being a young earther is science denial. We need look no further than the pandemic to see how problematic science denial can get. One aspect of young earth thinking that leads people astray is the thought that all scientific discoveries must be complete. They can never change. They see any change in scientific thought as an admission of failure. The scientists ran their experiments and failed to come up with the right answer the first time, so the methodology must be wrong. This causes the young earther to conclude that scientists don't know how old the earth is. For example, 400 years ago, scientists attempted to predict the age of the Earth based on changing sea levels, the time it took Earth or the Sun to cool to its present temperatures, and the salinity of the ocean. It has only been in the 20th century that we've been able to use radiometric dating. As radiometric dating tools have become more precise, scientists have been able to narrow the margin of error on the Earth's birthday to about 50 million years. But each time there is an advancement in technology that allows us to make more precise measurements, the young earthers say, "Aha, so your last estimate was wrong, wasn't it?" Which makes about as much sense as telling an artist as she chisels off another piece of marble towards her finished product, "The sculpture was wrong." It wasn't wrong, it just wasn't finished yet. Same with the date of the Earth. It's about 4.8 billion years old, plus or minus 50 million years. Someday, someone will come up with another method that will be more precise and put it at, say, 4.756 billion years old. That doesn't make 4.8 plus or minus 50 million wrong. The new date will be merely more precise. This has nothing to do with the methodology. It's just the best that we have right now. During the pandemic, scientists scrambled to identify this new virus, make a vaccine for it, and come up with treatments for patients who were ill with COVID. Just because the best that we had to treat the disease 3 months after it was discovered was highly ineffective doesn't mean doctors were still unable to treat COVID a year later. But when your way of thinking tells you that there is only one right answer to every question, if the answer you have is right, it just isn't the best answer, you tend to distrust the doctors that gave you the imprecise answer while they looked for the more precise one. What's more, scientists are human. They do sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes those errors lead to disastrous results.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells.
This morning, it looked as though they were not going to be able to get off.
Obviously a major malfunction.
But this doesn't mean that scientists don't know how to do science, or that science doesn't work, or that scientists don't know what they're doing. It just means that there's more work to be done. Throwing up our hands and asking a God to do it for us will never solve anything, which is the young earthers' way of handling problems. Those that were taught this way of thinking were unable to accept that the vaccine was the best way there was for surviving COVID. And as we know, many that refused the vaccine died. Yet this way of thinking is just 2 heartbeats away from being president of our country. This way of thinking that says don't trust doctors and don't trust scientists because the answers they come up with don't always comply with my way of looking at the Bible. Truth matters. If your way of looking at the Bible requires you to deny truth, you should be asking yourself why. Do you serve a God that doesn't care about truth? Does this God require you to believe whatever he says even when you know it's a pile of poppycock?
Then all you have is a load of unsubstantiated circumstantial poppycock.
If so, it's time to decide why you think this God is worth your time and effort. If you really honestly can't see that the earth is more than 6,000 years old, try educating yourself. Many of the scientists that understand that the earth is over 4 billion years old are Christians. This isn't an atheist idea. Look at what fellow believers say about the age of the earth. Even most creationists are not young earth creationists. The young earth position is based entirely on the Bible. There is no data, geological or otherwise, to support such a position. It's why young earthers claim they look at the same data sets that we do and they just interpret it differently, which means that they start with the conclusion that their interpretation of the Bible is right, and then they try to make the data fit that conclusion. Real study of a subject requires one to look at the data with an open mind to wherever the data takes you. If that means your Bible interpretation is wrong, that doesn't mean that you must give up your faith. Just change your interpretation of your holy book. Many young earthers hold to the idea of biblical inerrancy. Every word in the Bible must be true. It must be, as it is the perfect word of a perfect God. When the Bible fails to meet that bar, which it does as there demonstrably was no global flood, the young earther then must choose between losing one's faith, changing one's interpretation of the Bible, or denial of reality. Unfortunately, most choose denial of reality. When top leaders in our country cannot accept evolution, cosmology, geology, and so on, that all prove their position to be in error, we end up where we are today, with some of the dumbest and most immoral people in our country as our leaders. According to Daniel Banks, Confessions of a Failed Young Earth Creationist, I was taught the reason churches are failing and the culture is secularizing is that Christians have accepted unbiblical theories of evolution into their theology. Apparently, this corrupted society, which felt free to leave God and his moral requirements behind, and destroyed religious faith and moral life within the church. In other words, the young earther not only sees the scientific community as having some kind of conspiracy against their way of thinking, a conspiracy that keeps young earth studies out of the mainstream science papers, but that believing in an old earth leads to the downfall of the entire culture. Gay sex, abortion, transgender rights, women's rights, all of these are causally connected to the believer failing to hold firmly to his young earth view, which is what we see in Mike Johnson. Here are excerpts from his most recent article from Answers in Genesis. In a 5-4 decision authored by Justice Anthony Kennedy, the majority declared that the U.S. Constitution requires every state to license and affirm marriages between two persons of the same sex. In reaching its conclusion, the court invalidated all existing laws throughout the country, including many state constitutional amendments that defined marriage exclusively as the union of one man and one woman. As well, it should. The right to marriage should be afforded to all, not just those who conform to your personal sexual preferences. The 13th Amendment also invalidated many states' constitutions that held that owning slaves was a legal right. Just because it was legal doesn't mean it was moral. Opposing same sex marriage is also immoral. So it was about damn time to do away with any laws opposing it. Justice Samuel Alito's forecast was just as foreboding. I assume, after this case, that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes, but if they repeat those views in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools. Justice Clarence Thomas declared the majority's decision will bring potentially ruinous consequences for religious liberty. It has been 8 years since Johnson wrote this article, and I still hear the bigots kicking and screaming about wanting marriage rights to be exclusively for those they deem worthy. We have already begun to see the impact on Christian bakers and county clerks, but soon everyone, students on secular campuses, soldiers, employees in government and private companies, etc., will face similar questions as they are pressured to choose between their conscience and conformity in such a rapidly changing environment. Every believer needs to re examine from the Bible how God intends for us to live out our faith in a hostile world. Christ calls us to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves as we share the gospel with love and conviction. If only they would do just that. Instead, you parade your faith in people's faces like a weapon. You seek to harm anyone who disagrees. Harmless as doves, my eye. Be assured that the hard questions anticipated by Chief Justice Roberts are already being asked. Should a Christian charity be denied tax exemption simply because it supports traditional marriage? Should a Christian college be denied accreditation for allowing only heterosexual couples into married housing? Should a Christian social worker be denied a professional license simply for declining marriage counseling to a same sex couple? Substitute any other form of bigotry into that sentence, and it becomes clear that the answer to each question is yes. Should a Christian charity be denied tax exemption because it supports racial separation? Yes. Should a Christian college be denied accreditation for allowing only male students to be enrolled? Yes. Should a Christian social worker be denied a professional license simply for declining marriage counseling to a same sex couple? Absolutely. The counselor's personal religious values have no place in determining who is worthy of services. If the social worker only approves services for those she deems worthy as they are not sinners, would she not then deny services to all potential clients? Is it the social worker's job to determine who is worthy of counsel? Is the social worker the judge and jury of all sin? If no, then it doesn't matter if her problem is same sex marriage, racial equality, women's rights, or gossip. She doesn't deny services based on her religious preferences. Would she deny services to a Muslim or Jewish couple because she doesn't approve of their religious beliefs? How about an atheist? If she can't counsel anyone who doesn't agree with her religious views, then she should not have a counseling license. She can be a minister in a church, but not a public counselor. This paragraph is rich. A Christian should never be deterred by cultural challenges and ever changing views of morality. We advocate for free speech and the free exercise of religion for everyone because we have ultimate confidence in the truth of the Bible, believing that it can triumph over every competing philosophy. Right. You want free expression of ideas, provided your ideas are the only ones allowed to be expressed, like the counselor that gets a license to be a bigot and choose to offer services only to clients who agree with her religious views. Finally, men are designed by God to be leaders, providers, and protectors in the home. Women are designed by God to be helpers and nurturers in the home. Men and women are equal in dignity, value, and worth, but different in role and function. We are called by God to pass down these truths of manhood and womanhood to the next generation. So the Speaker of the House looks at his female colleagues and sees people who are supposed to be helpers and nurturers in the home. I do agree that a woman's place is in the House, and in the Senate, and on the Supreme Court, and in the Oval Office, and anywhere else that a man claims a right to be. Claiming that women are of equal worth but just have a different role than men is just poppycock. You claim men's roles to be those of authority and power, and if women aren't entitled to as much authority and power as a man, then you do not hold her of equal worth. When was the last time a woman was paid for nurturing at home? Never. That's when. If women being nurturers at home was a position of value to you, then why did you vote to cut aid to single mothers? Why did you vote to cut every federal program that would support a woman in that role? Because you don't value women. You don't see them as equals. You see them as baby machines that are to be under your control. During a House Judiciary Committee hearing, Johnson claimed Social Security would have no problems if we would just get rid of Roe v. Wade.
Roe v. Wade gave constitutional cover to the elective killing of unborn children in America, period. You think about the implications of that on the economy. We're all struggling here to cover the bases of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all the rest. If we had all those able-bodied workers in the economy, we wouldn't be going upside down and toppling over like this.
Just force women to have more babies. Problem solved. If you really feel that the United States needs more workers, how about just processing a few thousand immigrants that want to come here and work, instead of forcing women who don't want to have babies, and then waiting 20 years for them to raise those babies for you, all without your support? Do you want workers, or do you want only white workers? Johnson has expressed support for a national ban on abortion. In 2021, he sponsored a heartbeat bill to implement a national ban on abortion at 6 weeks, with criminal penalties to physicians who perform abortions, except to save the life of a mother. This year, he co-sponsored the Life at Conception Act, which declares the right to life guaranteed by the Constitution is vested in each human being at all stages of life, including the moment of fertilization. I seriously don't think these people think through the implications of such legislation. This will give legal person status to the products of conception, making all embryos in IVF clinics legal persons. Worse, how is a woman to dispose of feminine hygiene products? Since the majority of all fertilized eggs are expelled from the body before implantation, any woman on her period has the potential to be naturally disposing of a product of conception. Legally, one cannot simply throw away a human corpse in the trash. If a zygote is a legal person, an expelled human zygote is a corpse, a dead body. Must we now put incinerators into restrooms to dispose of any possible human corpses in feminine hygiene products? This is obviously ridiculous. No one thinks a microscopic expelled human zygote is a human body needing a human burial, and it is equally preposterous that a microscopic human zygote has any other human rights as well. It is not a sentient being. Even Senate Republicans are warning Johnson not to introduce legislation in the House that would implement a national ban on abortion, as it could hurt them in the 2024 elections. Will Johnson listen? This has yet to be seen. Johnson claims for himself a divine right to rule. He believes God put him in his current position, claiming the Bible is very clear that God is the one who raises up those in authority. The last thing this country needs is a Speaker of the House that can't understand evolution, has such a poor grasp on history, biology, geology, genetics, mythology, and cosmology that he thinks the Earth is only 6,000 years old. He has such a poor grasp on morality that he thinks a God that condones slavery and genocide has given him the right to tell women what they must do with their bodies. The biggest problem for the young Earth position is the heat problem. There are several aspects to this problem. Radioactive decay rates is the biggest. To arrive at our current level of radioactive decay, assuming a constant rate of decay, the heat generated by the decay needed to reach current levels in a mere 6,000 years would have vaporized the Earth many times over. Worse, if such was the case, the heat level at the time of the Garden of Eden would make the Earth hotter than the sun. Young earthers try to solve the problem by claiming the decay rate is not constant. There was a super fast decay rate during Noah's flood. But this only compounds the problem, as you now have all that heat being released in a single year, vaporizing the Earth hundreds of times over during the flood. The young earther then appeals to God for a miracle to save them from the problems of their own theology. Plate tectonics create a second heat problem for the young earther. In this article by Erica Gutzik-Gibbon, she lays out not only the problem, but how even the problem proves the accuracy of radiometric dating, something young earthers deny. Young Earth creationists will often admit that radioactive dating can be accurate for a few thousand years, but tend to insist that it fails when applied to older rocks due to presuppositions. Dates can only be reliable if radioactive decay rates haven't changed, the systems have remained closed, the rocks haven't been overheated, and the samples haven't been contaminated. And to them, that's a lot of ifs. You can propose the fact that multiple dating methods agree, and they respond that it is possible that the decay rates have been slowing proportionally. You can propose coral reefs, dendrochronology, and ice cores, and they might wave away these as well as other various statements on fast-growing reefs, double annual rings, and corrupted ice samples. None of these excuses are valid, but anyone using these particular excuses won't care. So what other methods can we use to determine the accuracy of radiometric dating? Well, for one, there is an enormous heat problem when invoking faster decay. A 70,000 degrees Celsius per kilometer kind of problem, actually. In conjunction with the Oklo reactor, we know the rates have remained constant. But let's say, for argument's sake, that none of that is good enough either. This is where we turn to plate tectonics. When we look at a map of the Atlantic seafloor, we can make out an enormous mountain ridge, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which divides North America and South America from Europe and Africa. Magma wells up at this ridge, which is volcanic in nature, and adds new crust, thus continuing the division of these continents and the expansion of the seafloor. Now, the ages of the rocks at the ocean's crust tell a story. The closer to the ridge, the newer the igneous rock formed, and thus the younger the rock. As we move outwards toward the continents on either side, the rock gets older with a maximum age of about 180 million years. We can measure the rate of separation of the continents by using the rock ages and the distance between the land masses as well, yielding a rate of 1.2 inches per year. Perhaps measuring at varying longitudes, we get a rate of 1.2 to 1.7 per year. So how does this help us test radiometric dating? Satellite stations on each continent allow us to precisely measure distance movement down to the scale of mere inches or less. Long-term measurement over the decades has given us a rate of movement of around 1 inch per year, the rate determined by radiometric dating. Flood geologists claim North America and Africa separated during Noah's flood extremely rapidly, and that the rates have slowed to their current rate by some means. For this to be the case, two entirely unrelated processes, plate movement and radioactive decay in isotopes, must have slowed down at precisely the same rate in order to give the appearance that the two corroborate one another. Young Earth is as scientifically supportable by data as flat Earth. It is an untenable position from a science standpoint, a moral standpoint, and a human standpoint. It has no credibility, and one holding such a position has no business being 2 heartbeats away from the presidency. Live your life.